Joseph here with another video, and today I'm going to take part in the Soul Tag for 2025 started by 6-Inch Pianist. If you're not familiar with his channel, he's a great wealth of knowledge on soul and some other genres from the UK, and I encourage you to check out his channel. Last year I took part in another Soul Tag. I don't believe it was started by him, but the tags are always fun, and it gives you a chance to look at your collection, and it gives me a chance to dig into my soul collection, which sometimes I tend to neglect. So first up on the tag is Saturday Night Record. Well, I'm going to start off the Saturday night with Junior Walker and the All-Stars, Home Cookin'. If you want to get a party started, go with Junior Walker because it's guaranteed to get people moving. I've seen this firsthand at some parties where things are kind of deadbeat. And one time I started spinning one of Junior's albums. It wasn't actually this album, but it was the Greatest Hits album. And you can't go wrong with any of his things on here. He's got Home Cookin', Sweet Soul. Of course, his slower song, What Does It Take to Win Your Love? City Part 1 and Part 2. But Junior Walker and that smoking tenor sax of his is guaranteed to get the party started. Next up is Sunday Morning Record. Well, this one I kind of went off in a different direction completely, and I'm going to go with Laura Nyro, Gonna Take a Miracle, where she's backed up by LaBelle, Patti LaBelle, and the Bells. And this is just such a beautiful record. Of course, I don't know if you're familiar with Laura Nyro, the singer-songwriter. She had a great run of albums in the late 60s, early 70s. And this was my introduction to Laura. This was the first Laura Nyro album I ever bought. I had never even really heard her music back in, I think this came out in 70 or 71. And I just saw the beautiful album cover, beautiful Laura, and of course LaBelle singing background. And this is her singing none of her own compositions, but nothing but rhythm and blues, oldies. And the reason I thought of this as a Sunday album is the album starts off with When I Met Him on a Sunday, which starts off into a cappella and then just gets into a really great groove. But just throughout, she does the Bells, Monkey Time, Dancing in the Street, Jimmy Mac, Spanish Harlem, and this was produced by Gamble and Huff, so it's really a beautiful production and a great sounding record. Laura Nyro and LaBelle, Gonna Take a Miracle. For number 3, soul cover version. Well, most soul artists cover songs, and of course you can go in many different directions, and I decided to go with Aretha Franklin, but not the more famous I Say a Little Prayer and Satisfaction, but I went with Aretha Soul 69. This album is really close to my heart because this is from my dad's collection, and he really enjoyed this album. He wasn't the biggest soul fan, but what he really enjoyed about this album is that Aretha kind of goes back to her earlier roots, where she was kind of a big band jazz singer, and this has got a killer big band with Ernie Royal, Snooky Young, King Curtis, and really a great band. But she has many covers here: Tracks of My Tears, Gentle on My Mind, which you wouldn't probably connect with Aretha, but just a lot of great covers. Bring It On Home to Me, the Sam Cooke song, and Aretha Franklin, Soul 69. If you ever see this, really check it out. Next up is Car Chase Soundtrack. Once again, if you go with a lot of soul instrumentals, it kind of gets you into that car chase groove. And I'm going with the Brecker Brothers. The Brecker Brothers you might not be familiar with, but Randy Brecker on trumpet and his brother Michael Brecker on tenor are just on so many great albums through the years, backing up so many artists. But they did have their own band at one time called the Brecker Brothers. And of course, most of it's instrumental and just really funky, grooving, funk jazz. And actually, I hadn't pulled this album out in a while. But the Brecker Brothers, they were just a smoking band. And if you ever get a chance to see this album and you like some good instrumental, jazz, rock, funk, check out the Brecker Brothers. Next up is at number 5, Artist Who Looks Cool. Right away, I mean, you can go with a lot of soul artists because generally they do look pretty cool on their album covers. But I saw this album, and it's Jerry Butler on ice. That's literally very cool. Here he's surrounded by a bunch of diamonds. And of course, Jerry's looking very fair in a good suit, looking at a diamond. But this is a wonderful album. It's got his hit Moody Woman, A Brand New Me, What's the Use of Breaking Up, and this also is a Gamble and Huff produced album. And I really need to get in, if I ever see more Jerry Butler albums, I'm going to pick him up because he's got such a great voice. Of course, he was an early member of the Impressions, but Jerry Butler, Ice on Ice, how cool is that? Next up is Horn Section. Well, right away, when I think of a horn section, I think of soul, funk. I think of one of my favorite bands of all time, and that's Tower of Power out of the East Bay. Emilio Castillo and the band are still going strong after all these years. But this is from their second album, Bump City, where they have singer Rick Stevens on board, who tragically would have to leave the band because he would be put in prison on a murder charge and be in prison for, I believe, 30 years. He did get released towards the end of his life and even sang a little bit with Tower of Power in some guest appearances. But here he's singing his big hit, You're Still a Young Man, and it's got that wonderful, beautiful trumpet intro by Mick Gillette. May he rest in peace. Mick Gillette was just such an artist. He had such great chops, a beautiful fat sound. He could do some funky trumpet solos all around. But this big brass sound of Tower of Power is just so amazing. And I've seen them throughout the years many times. They put on a great show, and they also too have been on many recordings backing up other artists. Tower of Power, Bump City. On the next one, it's an album by a white artist, Blue Eyed Soul. And here I went with, I haven't seen anybody post anything by these guys for this number, but I went with the Rascals. And you can definitely call them Blue Eyed Soul. This has been one of my favorite albums of all time. Perhaps I think it's one of the best greatest hits albums out there. Back when I was a kid, when I was home supposedly sick, my sister had this album in her collection. I would go in her room and play it on the sneak. And I just love every single cut on here. But Groovin', Love is a Beautiful Thing, Midnight Hour, Mustang Sally, It's a Beautiful Morning, A Girl Like You. Every song on here is just really outstanding. Blue Eyed Soul, Felix Cavallari on vocals, along with Eddie Brighetti on some. Powerful drumming by Dino Danelli, and just a wonderful greatest hits package of Blue Eyed Soul. Feel it. It's the Rascals' greatest hits, Timepiece. Next up is Recommend a Soul Record to a Friend. Here I went with an album by The Temptations, Cloud 9. And why this one I would recommend to a friend that needs to be introduced to soul is it's got that psychedelic soul on side one, which includes Cloud 9. I heard it through the grapevine, which is more mainstream, and Runaway Child, Running Wild, where they go into some of those psychedelic jams. So it gives you that psychedelic soul, a mix that the Temptations were so good at in the late 60s. But then on side two, they go back to their more original sound, where they're singing Love is a Hurtin' Thing, Hey Girl. It's the more traditional early Motown sound. And so with Cloud 9, you get the best of both worlds. You get the early vibes of the Temptations and also that psychedelic mix. Cloud 9, The Temptations. Next up, Sampled. I'm not really into sampled music at all, so I just kind of went on a wild goose chase. And I saw this album. It's Motown's collection, Original Big Hits, 16 Big Hits, Volume 9. And it's got, of course, a lot of the big hits. It's got Ain't No Mountain High Enough, Honey Child by Martha Reeves, Come See About Me, Junior Walker, Bernadette with the Four Tops, Your Precious Love by Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell, and More Love. And I looked up More Love by Smokey Robinson, and apparently it's been sampled by a couple artists, David Holmes, Steady B, and Kent. And I'm sure a lot of these other songs have been sampled also by many other artists, but it's Motown, 16 original big hits, and these are all excellent compilations. Back in the days before streaming and tape mixes, this was the only way to go, where you had to get kind of the best of stuff, was these great compilations, and these Motowns are pretty good. Next up is Sweet Harmonies. And here I went with, yes, this is number 10, Sweet Harmonies. And here I went with a group that definitely needs to have sweet harmonies, and they do. It's called the Persuasions a cappella. And this is an all a cappella album, which for most of their career, they were all a cappella, very little instrumentation, if any. And on this album, they do some great numbers: Searching for My Baby, Old Man River, Don't Look Back, Up on the Roof, great version. But they have a really great lead singer, and of course the harmonies are spot on, doing a cappella. And there's an album out there where they actually cover some Frank Zappa songs. They cover some Grateful Dead songs on one album, and the Persuasions. I've always had a sweet spot for their great a cappella sound. Persuasions, a cappella. And we're getting here towards the end. Modern soul record. Well, I don't really buy a lot of modern, quote unquote, albums. So I went with kind of one of the more modern albums, soul albums I have, and I went with Sade, which of course is not that modern. I believe it's from the late 70s or 80s, middle 80s. Sade, Promise. Of course, I've always liked her sexy, cool sound. And on this one, it's got The Sweetest Taboo, Is It a Crime, Never as Good as the First Time. But I love all of Sade's albums, and this is one of her early ones. And great modern soul. She always sounds great. Always a cool, wonderful vibe. And here we are at number 12. And number 12 is Pub Jukebox. What would you want to hear in a pub jukebox? Well, I went with Sly and the Family Stone's Greatest Hits. You go down this album, any one of these songs could be on a jukebox. You could have a good time drinking a couple of cold ones. Of course, it's got I Want to Take You Higher, Everyday People, Dance to the Music, Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again, and Sly and the Family Stone's Greatest Hits. Well, that'll about do it for this vinyl tag. Hope you enjoyed some of the records that I showed to you. Hope you like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you next time. Joseph, out.